This past Thursday for a meeting with our diocesan leadership. I was joining the group of regional deans and regional presidents. Chris Conrad, who is on the diocesan executive committee, was there as well. By the way, Chris was there, started with the executive committee because I put him on the committee. He didn't have much of a say in the matter. So I want to thank Chris, who I can't see, but I want to thank Chris for his leadership in that area. And the deans and I were meeting, and I must say that looking through the glass door, I could see Chris's budget committee laughing all the time through their meeting. So I assume that means our 2018 diocesan budget is in very good shape. We were also there to have lunch with our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, who came to Charlottesville very intentionally in a pastoral visit with specifically the Charlottesville clergy in light of the events of August 11th and 12th. So Bishop Curry met with the Charlottesville clergy in the morning in a meeting where no press was allowed, the doors were closed, and it was a chance for clergy simply to be with their pastor. Following our lunch, Bishop Curry spoke and then opened up the floor for a time of questions and answers. And I must tell you, it was a very candid sort of Q&A time. One young woman, a young African-American woman who is a deacon, stood up to say, "Bishop, can you help me, give me some advice, because I'm the only person of color in my church. So what do I say? Can you give me some advice?" I will say Bishop Curry was very clear to say, "I'm not the expert here. You're not coming here to meet with your presiding bishop because I'm going to give you all the answers and tell you how to do this. I am but one person in this struggle, in these uncertain times with you. We live in very interesting times," he said, "and so I'm here to help you, but not to necessarily give you the answers." And to show you what a candid conversation it was, there was a white gentleman who stood up and said, "Bishop, can you help me? Because I was here in Charlottesville. I live here. And I was at the demonstration. And I saw the counter-protesters throwing things at the white supremacist. So can you help me understand?" So the conversation ranged between those two very honest statements. In the room, the bishop allowed room for that kind of honesty. It was very helpful to me. Bishop Curry reminded us that we live in this tension right now. He said, "We are in a mess, but we are the ones to put order to it. We in the church, we as disciples of Jesus, help put order to all of this craziness where people want to pick up things and throw it at one another. That is what we are called to do as Jesus' disciples." We've drawn lines in the sand. Humans have done that for centuries. We've created boundaries and borders, and some of those boundaries are very good. Some of those boundaries are necessary. We hear about a very large, huge boundary this morning. There was a time when the Hebrew people were making their way out of Egypt. They were on the move. They were getting ready to be on the move. And they took blood and painted it around the doorpost of their homes. And by that initial act, they drew a boundary. Because they forever declared in that moment, in that instance, we are Jews. We are the Hebrew people. We are different than others. And so by that act, they went on and continued to live on as a different group of people. Boundaries give identity and definition. And some boundaries, some fences are good. I'm a Christian. I'm someone who tries to follow Jesus. But I draw another boundary. I'm an Episcopalian, and I'm proud of it. We all draw boundaries and create definitions. And that's important because unless we draw a line and say something about what lies outside of us, then we can't really speak about what is within us that gives it any meaning. If we can't define and talk about what lies beyond us and is different than us, then we really can't talk about who we are as Christian folk. We draw a very definite boundary. We will repeat this boundary in just a few minutes when we all say the Nicene Creed. We declare who we are. And by declaring who we are and who we belong to, we inherently say something about that which is not what we say. And that's okay. I'm good friends with Rabbi Bruce Aft next door, our neighbor. He and I joke around a lot. I tell Rabbi Bruce that his biggest theological mistake in his life is that he's from the south side of Chicago and he pulls for the White Sox. I lived in the north side of Chicago and pull for the correct team, being the Cubs. But when Rabbi Bruce and I are together, because we have a relationship and know one another, we know that we're not trying to convert each other to the other's opinion or belief. We say that it's okay to be different. It's okay to be a Jew. It's okay to be a Christian. How do we live together in the midst of our difference? And so we work at trying to find more ways to live together than letting our theological and baseball differences divide us. Robert Frost was correct in saying that good fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors. And let me tell you, I really don't like my neighbor. My neighbor on Cara Place in Burke, I really don't like. Just the other night, he and a group of friends were out till 2 a.m. in the back, drinking beer, talking on their cell phones in Spanish, yammering. This is not an isolated event, by the way. How do I love my neighbor as myself? It's tough. When the Hebrew people painted blood around their doorpost, they were liberated from Egypt not to wander around aimlessly in the wilderness, but instead for a purpose. As Mother Margaret told us last week, they were liberated for a purpose, and that was to worship God and serve their neighbor. A young female Jewish writer, Desi Berkowitz, writes about this, that the fulfillment of Jewish freedom, she says, in the Passover, in the painting of blood around the doorpost, and in leaving Egypt, that purpose, that freedom was a fulfillment to love God and to look out for the needs of others before we look out for our own desires. And that is tough. There was another Jew who said the same thing. He was a very observant Jew, known as a rabbi. And when Jesus was asked to summarize all the law, how do we live together? Summarize it. What is it? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and your strength, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that is hard. There are a lot of times I don't like my physical neighbor, and there are a lot of times I don't love my neighbor across town or around the world. This doesn't say like your neighbor. There's a difference between liking and loving someone. Loving someone is very difficult work. It's not something you just pick up from a Hallmark greeting card. It's tough. And so, no wonder we might hear the reading from Romans today. Paul writes to that church in Rome, "Owe no one anything except to love one another." Right. And that may sound really sappy and cheesy to us. But love is very difficult work, one that we are called to as disciples of Jesus. We read that letter of Paul to the church in Rome. Do you remember Paul before he became a famous writer? His alias was Saul. He killed a lot of Jews who stood up and said, "I want to follow this way of Jesus." And Saul took part in killing them. If Saul were in Charlottesville August 11th and 12th, I can bet you he would have picked up a rock and thrown it. No matter what his cause was, he would have picked up a rock and thrown it. But somewhere along the way, somehow, in some method, Saul encountered the living God in Jesus Christ, and his life changed. His life changed. Owe no one anything except to love one another. Speaking of the boundaries we live with, on Thursday night, Bishop Curry preached at St. Paul's Church there on the campus of UVA. My good friend, Imam The Law in Kaya, who some of you have met, you've heard me talk about him, he joined me for the Eucharist and worship service. Imam The Law no longer lives in Fairfax. He's now the Muslim chaplain at the UVA hospital. He moved to Charlottesville the weekend of August 11th, 12th, and 13th. We're sitting in this jam-packed church. Bilal tells me that this is the first time he's ever sat through a complete Christian service in Eucharist. And so he had all kinds of questions while the service was going on. I kind of felt like he and I were the color commentators of a golf tournament. Tim, what's he doing now? Well, the bishop is about to do this, and this is the reason he does it. During Bishop Curry's sermon, if you've ever heard Bishop Curry, he does not preach as I do. Bishop Curry's an African American. What we share is we're both from the South, but he's a gifted preacher, but he has a wonderful presence. He has a larger-than-life presence in a room. So here he is thundering, and Bilal leans over. Tim, do you preach like that? No, Bilal, I'm afraid I don't quite have that in me. But I was struck. During the service, I did things that I would do here on any given Sunday. I stood up and I said the words of the Nicene Creed. I believe in Jesus Christ. Saying that, standing next to a Muslim imam. I crossed myself when I normally cross myself to remind me of the crucifixion of Jesus. And I did that without any thought or regard to the Muslim standing right next to me. I've mentioned to you that the greatest gift Bilal has given me in our friendship is very early on, where he said to me, Tim, you and I are different. And that's okay. He said, whatever you do, don't try to make us the same. We worship one God, yes, but don't make us the same. That was an incredible gift of friendship. Good fences do make good neighbors. Bishop Curry answered that gentleman's question during lunch, that question of, what do I do? Help me make sense of people who pick up rocks and throw it. And Bishop Curry was quite clear in quoting Martin Luther King Jr. to say that love is not to be violent. Love is to be intentional. Love is to have purpose. And love is following the way of Jesus. Bishop Curry said, I can't do that on my own, and you know what? I can't do that. Tim Heflin doesn't have all the requisite skills and abilities on my own to love other people. Left to myself, that's very difficult. But I pledge my life, I pledge who I am in trying to follow this one called Jesus of Nazareth. And he told his disciples to love one another. The very night before he was killed, the very night before he was executed, Jesus was at table with his friends. What did he do? If he were anything like me, or perhaps some of you, he would have drawn up a battle plan. Let's take it to our enemies. This is how we're going to win. This is how we're going to do them in who are after me. He told his disciples, "This is my command to you. Love one another." It ain't easy. To the young black woman, the deacon in a rural parish, Bishop Curry told her, "You may not like this, but you're just going to have to love them." Those people who disagree with you, you're just going to have to love them. We are in a mess, but we who follow Jesus, we who are disciples of Jesus, we who are the church, must proclaim and demonstrate a different way to the world. A world that's in a mess. We are called to and must live and show a very different way of behaving. It's time to put rocks down. And by that I mean rocks on both sides, rocks on all sides. It's time to put those down. Owe no one anything except to love one another. May that be so. Amen.